Everybody, I'm here with Zelda, and I'm going to be doing my first chapter Friday. Since we talked about this week in our 5 Minute 5 historical fiction, I figured I'd keep up with the trend, and I'm going to read the first chapter of the book, The Breadwinner by Deborah Ellis. I thought it was really good. I just finished it myself. And I'm going to give you a little background on it before we get started. As we know about historical fiction, the setting of the historical fiction books is set in history, so that's sometime in the past, and it's usually set during big events in history like the Holocaust, Civil War, and this one is set during the time that the Taliban took over Afghanistan. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that so you understand before we get started. So it's set in the 1990s in the country Afghanistan. That you can see here is right there. It is kind of near Pakistan and Iraq. It is a beautiful mountainous country. And it is considered an Islamic republic in that pretty much 99% of the people that live there are Muslim. But it used to be a very modern city and country where the women were allowed to go to university and work. It was very, what I would say, cosmopolitan. That means that a lot of people used to go there to go on vacations and things like that. So it was actually really like a modern, normal kind of a country. The way that we would think of not quite as democratic as America, but pretty similar. So what happened was Russia invaded them. And since we did not want Russia taking over Afghanistan, the United States backed a lot of rebel groups in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, one of those rebel groups ended up being this group called the Taliban that ended up winning and beating Russia, but then they ended up taking over. And they are very strict religious Muslim group that doesn't believe that women should have rights or wear makeup or go to school. They banned a lot of things, including education for girls. They banned makeup. They banned movies. It was very traditional for them to fly kites. They weren't allowed to do that anymore. And if you got caught doing any of those things, they were very strict about punishment. Usually they would have, for very minor things, they would do very extreme punishments. Like if someone was caught stealing, they would cut off the person's hand. A lot of people were executed, things like that. And when they were in control, to make matters even worse, Al-Qaeda, they backed the group Al-Qaeda, which you may know was chiefly responsible for the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. So, bad guys. So this was set during that time, and I'm going to get started right now. Okay, here we go. The Breadwinner, first chapter. Chapter 1. I can read that letter as well as Father can, Parvana whispered into the folds of her chador. Well, almost. She didn't dare say those words out loud. The man sitting beside her father would not want to hear her voice, nor would anyone else in the Kabul market. Parvana was there only to help her father walk to the market and back home again after work. She sat well back on the blanket, her head and most of her face covered by her chador. If you've ever seen pictures of people in the Middle East, the women, they have to cover their head and most of their face with something called a chador. That's those, sometimes you hear them too called a burqa. It's like when you have your whole head covered so they can't see their hair and sometimes they can't see most of their face. Okay, so I'll continue. She wasn't really supposed to be outside at all. The Taliban had ordered all the girls and women in Afghanistan to stay inside their homes. They even forbade girls to go to school. Parvana had to leave her 6th grade class, and her sister Noria was not even allowed to go to her high school. Their mother had been kicked out of her job as a writer for a Kabul radio station. For more than a year now, they had all been stuck inside one room, along with 5-year-old Mariam and 2-year-old Ali. Parvana did not get out for a few hours most days, but she did get out sometimes to help her father walk. She was always glad to go outside, even though it meant sitting for hours on a blanket spread over the hard ground of their marketplace. At least it was something to do. She even got used to holding her tongue and hiding her face. She was small for her 11 years. As a small girl, she could usually get away with being outside without being questioned. "I need this girl to help me walk," her father would tell any Talib who asked, pointing to his leg. He had lost the lower part of his leg when the high school he was teaching in was bombed. His insides had been hurt somehow, too. He was often tired. "I have no son at home except for an infant," he would explain. Parvana would slump down further on the blanket and try to make herself look smaller. She was afraid to look up at the soldiers. She had seen what they did, especially to women. The way they would whip and beat someone they thought that should be punished. Sitting in the marketplace day after day, she had seen a lot. When the Taliban were around, what she wanted most of all was to be invisible. Now the customer asked her father to read the letter again. "Read it slowly so that I can remember it for my family." Parvana would have liked to get a letter. Mail delivery had recently started again in Afghanistan after years of being disrupted by the war. Many of her friends had fled the country with their families. She thought they were in Pakistan, but she wasn't sure, so she couldn't write to them. Her own family had moved so often because of the bombing that our friends no longer knew where she even was. "Afghans cover the earth like stars cover the sky," her father often said. Her father finished reading the man's letter a second time. The customer thanked him and paid. "I will look for you when it is time to write a reply." Most people in Afghanistan could not read or write. Parvana was one of the lucky ones. Both of her parents had been to university, and they believed in education for everyone, even girls. Customers came and went as in the afternoon wore on. Most spoke Dari, the same language Parvana spoke best. When a customer spoke Pashto, she could recognize most of it, but not all. Her parents could speak English too. Her father had gone to university in England. That was a long time ago. The market was a very busy place. Men shopped for their families, and peddlers hawked their goods and services. Some, like the tea shop, had their own stalls. With such a big urn and so many trays of cups, it had to stay in one place. Tea boys ran back and forth into the labyrinth of the marketplace, carrying tea to customers who couldn't leave their own shops, then running back again with the empty cups. "I could do that," Parvana whispered. She'd like to be able to run around the market, to know its winding streets as well as she knew the four walls of her home. Her father turned to look at her. "I'd rather you see you running around in a schoolyard." He turned around again to call out to the passing men. "Anything written? Anything read? Pashtu and Dari, welcome, wonderful items for sale." Parvana frowned. It wasn't her fault she wasn't in school. She'd rather be there, too, instead of sitting on this uncomfortable blanket, her back and bottom getting sore. She missed her friends, her blue and white school uniform, and doing new things each day. History was her favorite subject, especially Afghan history. Everybody had come to Afghanistan. The Persians came 4,000 years ago. Alexander the Great came too, followed by the Greeks, Arabs, Turks, British, and finally the Soviets. One of the conquerors, Tamerlane from Samarkand, cut off the heads of his enemies and stacked them in huge piles like melons at a fruit stand. All these people had come to Parvana's beautiful country to try to take it over, and the Afghans had kicked them all out again. But now the country was ruled by the Taliban militia. They were Afghans, and they had very definite ideas about how things should be run. When they first took over the capital city of Kabul and forbade girls to go to school, Parvana wasn't terribly unhappy. She had a test coming up in arithmetic that she hadn't prepared for, and she was in trouble for talking in class again. The teacher was going to send a note to her mother, but the Taliban took over first. "What are you crying for?" she had asked Noria, who couldn't stop sobbing. "I think a holiday is very nice." Parvana was sure the Taliban would let them go back to school in a few days. But then her teacher would have forgotten all about sending a tattletale note to her mother. "You're just stupid," Noria screamed at her. "Leave me alone." One of the difficulties of living with your whole family in one room was that it was impossible to really leave anyone alone. Wherever Noria went, there was Parvana, and wherever Parvana went, there was Noria. Both of Parvana's parents had come from old, respected Afghan families. With their education, they had earned high salaries. They had a big house with a courtyard, a couple of servants, a television set, a refrigerator, and a car. Noria had her own room. Parvana had shared a room with her little sister Miriam. Miriam chatted a lot, but she thought Parvana was wonderful. And it's certainly been wonderful to get away from Noria sometimes. That house had been destroyed by a bomb. The family had moved several times since then. Each time, they moved to a smaller place. Every time their house was bombed, they lost more of their things. With each bomb, they got poorer. Now they lived together in one small room. There had been a war going on in Afghanistan for more than 20 years, twice as long as Parvana had been alive. At first, it was the Soviets who rolled their big tanks into the country and flew warplanes that dropped bombs on villages in the countryside. Parvana was born 1 month before the Soviets started going back to their own country. "You were such an ugly baby, the Soviets couldn't stand to be in the same country with you," Noria was fond of telling her. "They fled back across the border in horror as fast as our tanks could carry them." After the Soviets left, the people who had been shooting at the Soviets decided they wanted to keep shooting at something, so they shot at each other. Many bombs fell on Kabul during that time, and many people died. Bombs had been part of Parvana's whole life. Every day, every night, rockets would fall out of the sky and someone's house would explode. When the bombs fell, people ran. First they ran one way, then they ran another, trying to find a place where the bombs wouldn't find them. When she was younger, Parvana was carried. When she got bigger, she had to do her own running. Now, most of the country was controlled by the Taliban. The word Taliban means religious scholars, but Parvana's family told her that religion was about teaching people how to be better human beings, how to be kinder. The Taliban are not making Afghanistan a kinder place to live, he said. Although bombs still fell on Kabul, they didn't fall as often as they used to. There was still a war going on in the north of the country, and that is where most of the killing took place these days. After a few more customers had come and gone, Father suggested they end their work for the day. Parvana jumped to her feet, then collapsed back down again. Her foot was asleep. She rubbed it, then tried again. This time she was able to stand. First, she gathered up all the little items they were trying to sell: dishes, pillowcases, household ornaments that had survived the bombing. Like many Afghans, they sold what they could. Mother and Noria regularly went through what was left of the family's belongings to see what they could spare. There were so many people selling things in Kabul, Parvana marveled that there was anyone left to buy them. Father packed his pens and writing paper in his shoulder bag. Leaning on his walking stick and taking Parvana's arm, he slowly stood up. Parvana shook the dust out of the blanket, folded it up, and they were on their way. For short distances, Father could manage with just his walking stick. For longer journeys, he needed Parvana to lean on. "You're just the right height," he said. "What will happen when I grow? Then I will grow with you." Father used to have a false leg, but he sold it. He hadn't planned to. False legs had to be specially made, and one person's false leg didn't necessarily fit another. But when a customer saw Father's leg on the blanket, he ignored the other things for sale and demanded to buy the leg. He offered such a good price that Father eventually relented. There were a lot of false legs for sale in the market now. Since the Taliban decreed that women must stay inside, many husbands took their wives' false legs away. "You're not going anywhere, so why do you need a leg?" they asked. There were bombed-out buildings all over Kabul. Neighborhoods had turned from homes and businesses into bricks and dust. Kabul had once been beautiful. Noria remembers whole sidewalks, traffic lights that changed color, evening trips to restaurants and cinemas. browsing in fine shops for clothes and books. But for most of Parvana's life, the city has been in ruins, and it was hard for her to imagine it any other way. It hurt her to hear stories of old Kabul before the bombing. She didn't want to think about everything the bombs had taken away, including her father's health and their beautiful home. It made her angry, and since she could do nothing with her anger, it made her sad. They left the busy part of the market and turned down a side street to their building. Parvana carefully guided her father around the potholes and broken places in the road. "How do women in burqas manage to walk along these streets?" Parvana asked her father. "How do they see where they're going?" "They fall down a lot," her father replied. He was right. Parvana had seen them fall. She looked at her favorite mountain. It rose up majestically at the end of the street. "What's the name of that mountain?" she had asked her father soon after they moved to their new neighborhood. "That's Mount Parvana." "It is not," Noria had said scornfully. "You shouldn't lie to the child," Mother had said. The whole family had been out walking together in the time before the Taliban. Mother and Noria just wore light scarves around their hair. Their faces soaked up the Kabul sunshine. "Mountains are named for people," Father said. "I'm a person, and I named that mountain Mount Parvana." His mother gave in, laughing. Father laughed too, and Parvana and baby Miriam, who didn't even know why she was laughing. Even grumpy Noria joined in. The sound of the family's laughter scampered up Mount Parvana and back down the street. Now Parvana and her father slowly made their way up the steps to their building. They lived on the third floor of an apartment building. It had been hit in a rocket attack, and half of it was rubble. The stairs were on the outside of the building, zigzagging back and forth on their way up. They had been damaged by the bomb and didn't quite meet in places. Only some parts of the staircase had a railing. "Never rely on the railing," Father told Parvana over and over. Going up was easier for Father than going down, but it still took a long time. Finally, they reached the door of their home and went inside. And that is it for the first chapter of The Breadwinner. If you're interested in continuing on your own, you can get the links I'm going to attach to my Google Classroom, where this video is also attached. You can get it at the Ocean County Library. It might be available through the Junior Library Guild or the Internet Archive. And I also attached some different websites and links that give you a little more information about the setting of this book, which is Afghanistan and Kabul is the city, maps, and I also attached a picture of it where a marketplace where Parvana worked, what it looked like, and if you want to check it out too. So I will see you next Friday for my next first chapter Friday read. See you then.